are the players you should be targeting on your Dynasty waiver wire this week? We're talking about that and more on today's episode of Locked On Dynasty.
You are Locked On Dynasty Football, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Here are your hosts, Matt Williamson and Ryan McDowell.
Welcome back to the Locked On Dynasty Football Podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thanks for making Locked On Dynasty your first listen every day. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Last-minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. I'm your host, Ryan McDowell. You can follow me on Twitter at RyanMC23. Joining me, as always, is former NFL scout Matt Williamson. Find Matt on Twitter at WilliamsonNFL. Matt, we are through 13 weeks of the NFL season. For most leagues, we are entering the final week of the fantasy regular season. I can't believe we're here already.
Yeah, it happens quick, and then the NFL season is so crazy for me and you and people do this for a living because in some ways it's Groundhog Day, it's a grind. Oh man, I'm doing the same thing again. And then you look around and it's early December and fantasy playoffs are here. And like, how did that happen?
Yeah, we spend the entire offseason. We spend months and months wishing we had real football to watch, and now here we are 13 weeks in, and I don't know about you, but I'm ready for the regular season to wrap up. There's a lot that we like about the offseason as well, and we'll be talking about all those rookies, all the changes to player value, to NFL teams, free agency, all the good stuff that the offseason brings. But we've got a few more weeks to grind and hopefully win some dynasty titles. We're trying to do that, and we can't ignore the waiver wire. I know it's late in the season. Maybe you're even out of that blind bid, that fab money, but you've got to keep hitting that waiver wire because once again, Matt, we had a lot of injuries. Let's run through them and talk about some of the potential replacements to these injured players and if they're even worth our time and, more importantly, worth a roster spot. Several quarterback injuries. Let's start with your Pittsburgh Steelers, obviously the one you're most plugged in with. Kenny Pickett goes down in that game, comes back out to the sideline in a boot. Obviously not what you want to see if you're a Steelers fan. Mitch Trubisky, the veteran backup, finishes up that game. What's the word on Kenny Pickett, and what are you doing from a dynasty standpoint here?
Yeah, I think it's going to be 3 weeks, give or take, with Pickett, and they didn't put him on IR, which is important. They're very much in the playoff hunt, despite a really bad loss to Arizona. I think that Trubisky can hold down the fort, but this is not a big-time passing game. It's not a big-time offense. Thursday, they play the Patriots in what might be the lowest scoring game in the history of the world. So that's not a useful situation, maybe not even in Superflex, although I know some owners don't have that advantage. I don't think it changes a whole lot. I mean, when Trubisky was in last year, he favored Deontay Johnson heavily, but that was early in the year in Pickens' rookie year. So who's to say, that times haven't changed dramatically. So I wouldn't change my outlook on things all that much.
Yeah, that's fair. And I think you made a good point. In a typical situation, especially late in the season here, you probably wouldn't normally even bother with picking up a guy like Mitch Trubisky. The problem is there were so many more injuries, even just this past week, that if you have avoided those injured players, especially at the quarterback spot, you count your
you got pretty lucky.
Count yourself among the lucky ones because it's running rampant here, and we might have to go with a Mitch Trubisky or a Joe Flacco or someone like that. Flacco, of course, started last week for the Browns. Looks like he'll keep that job. I think he was a low-end QB1 for the week. Certainly looked a lot better than most people probably expected. even lost Amari Cooper midway through that game and still looked solid, and I mean, it just made you wonder, what are the Jets doing? What are some of these other teams doing that could have given him a call weeks and weeks ago? So Flacco's another desperation waiver wire play, obviously, with both Trubisky and Flacco, and really everyone that we're going to talk about here at the quarterback position. None of these guys have long-term value. None of these guys have appeal beyond the rest of the season. So if you're out of the playoff run, I probably would not even add these guys, honestly, unless your trade window is still open and you think you could flip for a quick third or something like that.
Well said. I'm going to throw one thing about Flacco. I did
Sure.
think he played really well. He's got a relationship with Elijah Moore going back to New York with the Jets. And I guess Moore's 2 100-yard games have both been with Flacco as his quarterback, and Cooper's banged up. So maybe it's a bump for him. It's just another way of looking at it. Now, my concern with Flacco, which again might not matter for Superflex and stuff for the rest of the year, is it's great to play one game as an old man, but how do you feel getting out of bed Monday morning and 2-3 weeks afterwards? Are you still as spry? We'll just see,
Yeah. Very, very good point there. A couple other quarterbacks, 3 other quarterbacks actually worth mentioning and monitoring. Let's run through these quickly. Jameis Winston, we saw Derek Carr go down, multiple injuries, including a potential concussion. We'll see if Derek Carr can go. If not, Jameis Winston is next in line. We saw Winston play on Sunday, and he's probably the one, if you're picking between these 5 guys that we'll mention here, he's the one that you want, just based on what we've seen of him throughout his career.
Oh, I'm still a believer, and I actually think he would kickstart that team that looks old and beat down right now. I haven't seen, when we're recording this, any news if he's going to get the start or not, though. Have you leaned in one way or another?
I have not either. It seems like I was talking with someone else about this. It seems like the later we get into the season, the tougher it is to find this injury news.
Good point.
Teams are either uncertain or just keeping that to themselves. So we might have to wait a couple more days to find out who's starting for the New Orleans Saints. Mm-hmm. Also unsure who's starting for the New York Jets. We saw Boyle get the start there once again. He got benched, ultimately got released. Actually, he's gone. Trevor Siemian, the veteran, former Bronco, came in as his replacement in that game on Sunday. He looked terrible as well. This has kind of been a messy situation. It sounds like they want to go back to Zach Wilson. We've seen that, we've seen that play out, obviously, not just this season, but the past couple of years. It's never been good. But Zach Wilson reportedly not sure he even wants to get back on the field. What's going on with the Jets? And do we even care, honestly?
I don't think I even care, honestly, to be honest. I mean, it's just, I assume Siemian will play out the string. I don't think we'll ever see Rodgers. We didn't even mention his name. That's crazy as well. I kind of get the hunch that Zach Wilson's played his last game with the Jets. Side note, I also think Mac Jones probably played his last game with the Patriots. Maybe they'll end up as backup somewhere else. Doesn't mean you need to ditch their super flex stock. Maybe a change of scenery be good for both of them, to be very honest with you. I think the Jets are flat out miserable right now.
Yeah, the Jets are seemingly, well, not even seemingly. I think they're out of the playoff hunt here. Maybe not officially, but they are, right? So yeah, we're just playing out the string. Obviously, we're not going to see Aaron Rodgers. I don't think we were ever going to see Aaron Rodgers.
No.
And I mean, we can't even really get solid performances consistently out of Breece Hall or Garrett Wilson. So yeah, we're not bothering with Trevor Siemian, Zach Wilson, or anybody else there. Last one, toughest one maybe, is Trevor Lawrence. We saw that on Monday Night Football, goes down with the ankle injury. Looked a lot worse than it was, but it still is being reported as a high ankle sprain. They're kind of being coy with this one a little bit too, saying he is not ruled out even for this upcoming week. but we know the deal with high ankle sprains, and typically that is a multi-week injury. So, we could be talking about Trevor Lawrence missing multiple weeks and potentially the entire fantasy playoffs for a lot of leagues. CJ Beathard is the backup. Looked fine, right? I mean, we've seen him. He's a former 49er, and he's a solid backup. Obviously, a step down from Trevor Lawrence in a major way, though.
Yeah, I mean, good head for the game. Probably will last in this league another 5 to 8 years, as those type of dudes do. I would bet that Lawrence rushes back, though. I mean, like if he's questionable, I don't know if he'll play this week, but if he's on the fringe, I have a feeling he's going to be hobbling around out there with a bad ankle and really limit his mobility, maybe even hurt, some of his receivers. We saw, Christian Kirk get hurt in that game as well. So the Jags offense is really in a state of flux right now, and I don't like it.
Yeah, Travis Etienne played pretty well on Monday night, but he's also been banged up over the past couple of weeks. So you're right. Jags look like they might be in a little bit of trouble, not even a lock for the playoffs at this point. A couple other names to mention on the waiver wire before we move on here. Chris Rodriguez, the rookie running back for the Commanders. We saw Brian Robinson go down with an injury. Chris Rodriguez and Antonio Gibson next up for the Commanders. I like Chris Rodriguez. He's a former Kentucky guy. Noah Brown, Houston wide receiver. Unfortunately, Tank Dell, his season is over. And you already mentioned the Christian Kirk injury. Parker Washington, rookie, saw a lot of playing time following Kirk's departure. He's certainly on waiver wires and definitely worth a pickup to see what that offense looks like over the next couple of weeks. Again, potentially and likely without Trevor Lawrence as well. So some names there for your Dynasty waiver wire. I'd say the rookies, Chris Rodriguez and Parker Washington, are the most intriguing to me at this point, Matt.
Yeah, I mean, Noah Brown's probably in a lot of leagues, but I would say he's a must pick up. Those other guys are, I like Rodriguez too. I think he fits the Brian Robinson mold, power runner, low to the ground, not super dynamic, but gets the job done is the way I see him. And Washington is an interesting player. I mean, he has some run after catch stuff, some end around, gimmicky bubble screen stuff to him, but it looks like he's evolving as a pure receiver too. So I like that pickup. I'll take a chance on him and maybe stash him over the offseason, see how that goes.
Absolutely. Matt, we talked about some struggling quarterbacks. We've got some other players that I'm a little concerned about. We're going to talk about those players and what to expect from them the rest of the season. We'll have that conversation next.
So my 16-year-old daughter went to her first Steeler game the other day, and she doesn't know anything about football, to be very honest with her. She just went with friends, and she must think that double rain delays and the Steelers losing to the worst team in the league with the place going crazy is a normal event. But she was psyched to go. She had fun, and so be it. So she decided to go, and we fired up the Game Time app and used our promo code, and fast and easy way to get tickets. I mean, there's no question about it. Whether it's football, any other sport, comedy, theater, music. I used it for Guns N' Roses not long ago. They have great killer last-minute deals, all-in prices. I like that a lot because it's not like they hit you with fees at the end. You know exactly what it's going to cost you. Views from your seat. Game Time takes the guesswork out of buying tickets. So it's really worked out well for us. It's the only ticketing app that gives you complete peace of mind with your purchase. I mentioned the view of your seat. You know exactly what to expect, how you're going to see the event, and it works out really cool as well. You buy tickets in seconds with just 2 taps. They have these zone deals that I've told you about before. You pick the section, and Game Time picks the seats, and then you average an 18% savings on the zone deals. That works out quite well as well. So here's what you need to do. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app. Create an account. Use code LOCKEDONNFL as we did for $20 off your purchase. Terms do apply. Again, create an account and redeem the code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed.
Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. Go to Locked On Sports Today on YouTube and subscribe to the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel. Man, I want to talk about some disturbing trends, some players that over the past month or so are not living up to expectations on the field when it comes to their production and specifically their fantasy production. I would love to get your thoughts on what you've seen from these players and if you think these guys can turn it around as the fantasy playoffs near. The first name on this list is a surprising one to me. It's Tua Tagovailoa. It feels like he's been playing well, but the numbers don't necessarily back that up because over the past 4 weeks, Tua is the quarterback 18. That is based on fantasy points per game, and he's still averaging just over 18 fantasy points per game. So certainly not a complete dud. But not matching his teammates' production either, as Tyreek Hill continues to go crazy. Tua, just the quarterback 18. What are you doing with Tua? Can we start him in the fantasy playoffs?
I think so. My concerns, or I think what's hurt him, is he's as good an example as there is in the league. Maybe Matthew Stafford's another, of just the value of running or the inability to really have a high ceiling without great running traits. And he's never really going to do that, even though he's a decent athlete. It's just not his game. And I also think that a lot of the schematic things that Miami did early in the season, the league is caught up to a little bit, and other teams are stealing some of their strange motions and things like that. So it's not, taking the world by storm, but it's still a really good offense. A Chan's back. There's probably a dump off from Tua that goes 80 yards from a Chan on the horizon, and all of a sudden he scores 30 points that week, things like that. And I also think because their defense has played so much better, no one seems to be talking about that, but over the last month, it's one of the best defenses in the league. They haven't had to be quite as aggressive. So I think he's fine, but I'm not thrilled about it.
Over the first 6 games of the season, Tua had 3 games where he was a top 2 overall quarterback. So QB1 in week 1, had 2 other games as the QB2 overall. You break that down, the past 6 games, though, and he has just 1 game as a top 10 quarterback, and even that was just this past week where he was the quarterback 9. So we haven't seen that ceiling, just 1 game with more than 20 fantasy points in the last 6 weeks as well. And he also threw in a total dud a couple weeks ago against the Jets with less than 8 fantasy points. So we're seeing the ceiling play from that offense in general. Achan, as you said, back and back to throwing up RB1 games. Tyreek Hill is the best receiver in the league right now by a long shot. Tua's just not getting it done. I think what you're talking about as far as his rushing yards is certainly correct. Doesn't have a game all year with more than 10 rushing yards. And that doesn't have to be your thing from a quarterback, but I mean, you're basically getting nothing from you're basically getting nothing from Tua in that regard. So I think we're kind of getting back to looking at him as a low end QB1 at best in Dynasty, and you see some of those guys creeping up on him, and maybe ready to jump him. Like, would you rather have Jordan Love or Tua in Dynasty right now?
That's really close. I'm all in on Love. I didn't think I would be. I think his young weapons are only getting better. Maybe they even add a veteran pass catcher to the mix. Miami has no cap space to get better going forward. So I think what you see is what you get. I think I'll go with Love, but that's close.
Okay. So that's kind of where we are. You look at Love as probably a high end QB2. That's probably where Tua belongs as well.
Yeah.
Here's another guy who is struggling, Alexander Mattison. We thought he had that job to himself. They make the trade for Cam Akers, and now it's a split. Cam Akers goes down with the injury. And again, you think this is probably good news for Mattison. Not so much. Not so much, Matt. Over the past month, he is the RB 42 and just giving you 6.5 fantasy points per game. I mean, even the past, let's see, we can go back really the past 8 weeks or maybe even more. RB 35, 31, 44. He did give you an RB 10 game when he had a receiving touchdown back in week 9, but even earlier than that, 55, 34, 23. He's been a huge disappointment this season.
He has, and I've never really been in on him because I think he's just a very average talent. I mean, and now maybe the age thing's starting to factor in a little. I mean, it can happen to guys quicker than you think. I don't have a great explanation or a strong feel for him. I really don't own him anywhere in many, many leagues I'm in, and I never felt like I was missing out. I don't feel like I am now. I guess if anything, it might start to trend up a little bit. I mean, Jefferson coming back might help, open some room for him, but I'm reaching.
Yeah, you have to. I mean, again, I mentioned the RB10 game. He's been the RB10 twice this season in a game, not higher than that at all. And those are his only 2 RB1 games on the year. And honestly, most weeks he's not even performing at an RB2 level. You just can't start this guy. You just cannot put him in your lineup, especially once we're in the fantasy playoffs and it's a win or go home situation. We got a couple other guys that I'm concerned about. I want to see if you're worried about these as well. We'll finish up this conversation next.
So I've told you about my Jace case and Jace Medical before, and I know we come to sports and podcasting and, fantasy to escape from some crazy realities of real life. But can we talk just a minute about preparing for real life? I mean, according to the FDA, pharmacies are running out of antibiotics like amoxicillin right in the middle of the worst flu season in over a decade. I mean, that's pretty scary stuff, if you ask me. I can't imagine a more helpless feeling than if one of our kids were to get sick and the supply chain issues kept them from life-saving medication they needed. So thankfully, we're okay because of Jace Medical. The Jace case is a pack of 5 different antibiotics to treat long list of bacterial illnesses, including UTIs, respiratory infections, skin infections, amongst all kinds of others. I mean, this stuff could happen to any of us. Visit Jace Medical and complete your physician encounter. It'll be reviewed by a board-certified physician, and your medications will be dispensed by a licensed pharmacy at a fraction of the regular cost, which is phenomenal. It's never been more important to be prepared than today. So go to jacemedical.com and use offer code Locked On to get $20 off your order. I already did. So check that out.
Matt, a couple other guys with some disturbing trends over the past month. Austin Eckler, we don't need to go too deep into this one. We talked about Austin Eckler as one of our panic players a little over a week ago. I know Kate and Marcus talked about him again on the panic episode to start this week. We're certainly concerned. This is 3 straight weeks where he's been outside of the top 30 fantasy running backs. I had some numbers from our buddy Rich Rebar last week. None of them are good, by the way. Over the past month total, he's the RB 29 and giving you just over 10 fantasy points per game. I can't believe we're here, but are we starting Austin Eckler in the fantasy playoffs?
Not until I see him look better on tape. I think that he's far from 100%. I mean, I know this past game was a really tough matchup for him. I mean, New England's a really good defense. There was only 6 total points in that whole game. Neither team even reached the red zone. But just watching him on tape, he doesn't look right. He looks like he's struggling. So, no, I think you have to stay away from him right now, which is hard to believe.
The Chargers-Pats game was so ugly, and
oh, man.
And Steelers Pats this week might be even worse.
Yep.
Marquise Brown, Wide receiver 74 over the past month, just 5.5 fantasy points per game. He's not been a top 24 fantasy wide receiver over the past 5 games. And in fact, he has just one top 24 performance over the past 8 weeks. So really, really tough stretch for Hollywood. He has been banged up, has hardly practiced, left at least one game early over the past couple weeks. So got a little bit of an excuse baked in, but he doesn't look like that explosive player that we've been used to.
No, but again, they were in town here this past week, and he drew a lot of Joey Porter Jr., who's quickly turning into a lockdown corner. Yeah. And to be honest, Brown didn't look like himself. Plus, he had a tough matchup, and then he left. I think it was the third quarter, never to return. I think it's a heel that's bothering him. But I'll be honest. I mean, I have a lot of optimism around the Arizona offense. I mean, Kyler Murray's now in his 4th game in this new system. McBride. I mean, they're okay on that side of the ball. That when he gets back to health and gets inserted into that group, I think he can do quite well. Just pay attention to the injury designation.
Yeah, he should never really be your number one wide receiver.
No.
I think he's better suited, just his play style, better suited to be that secondary option, obviously a deep threat. You look at every mock draft that's out there, and it looks like the Cardinals are going to have that 3rd pick. That might be Marvin Harrison territory. So if you think about Kyler, Marvin Harrison, Trey McBride, and then Hollywood as that 2nd or 3rd option, that sounds a lot better. So sounds like maybe you like the idea of buying low on Hollywood, but not necessarily using him the rest of this season.
Yeah, I mean, unless he's back out there practicing and back to full health, pay attention to the injury reports. But yeah, I'd like to grab him now, considering what he's going for. I would imagine it's pretty cheap.
One of your favorites is Terry McLaurin, and he has been struggling this season. I've seen it and read it that McLaurin has the best quarterback play of his career, but he's having the worst season of his career. Just over 6 fantasy points the past month on average, and he's the wide receiver 63. Of course, had a goose egg on Sunday. That hurt me and everybody else who put him in a fantasy lineup. Is there hope for McLaurin, or is this the beginning of the end for him?
I lean towards there's hope for him, but I'm a little clouded because I am a big fan of his game. I don't think you need our opinion to know that there are big changes coming in Washington, coaches, maybe quarterback. I mean, scheme, if Bieniemy's gone. He obviously has some other good receivers he's competing with, but I would bet on talent and past production here and say this is maybe a blip in his career.
Not using him the rest of this season, though, unless we see a major change.
Not soon, right? Not soon.
Yeah, I agree. All right, so we're worried about all those guys. I don't think we're using maybe outside of Tua. We're certainly not starting Alexander Madison or Hollywood Brown, McLaurin, and as wild as it sounds, don't start Austin Eckler if you have any other realistic option the rest of this season. That is going to do it for today's show. Please make sure you download and subscribe or follow for free on YouTube or wherever you get your podcast. Remember to follow the show at Locked On Dynasty. Follow Matt at Williamson NFL. And I'm Ryan, MC23. We'll be back next time with more Locked On Dynasty.